Was this a mistake because I thought I was just tagging along with a group of university students doing some kind of cultural project in a remote village in East Java? At the time, it honestly sounded interesting. They were documenting local traditions, interviewing villagers, filming ceremonies, normal student research stuff. And since I was already traveling through Indonesia alone, I figured joining them for a few days would make for a good experience. Looking back now, I really wish I never went there. Because what happened in that village still doesn't fully make sense to me even years later. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever want it to. I met them at a small roadside restaurant while waiting for a bus that never came. They were loud, joking around, carrying cameras, tripods, backpacks, basically impossible not to notice. One of them spoke decent English and started asking where I was from, what I was doing in Indonesia, things like that. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward their village project. They said they were documenting local traditions in a remote area deep in East Java. At first, it sounded harmless. Interesting even, since I was already traveling alone, they casually invited me to come along. At least, I think that's how it happened. There were 6 of them in total. Most of them were friendly almost immediately, especially the guys. They kept talking about how isolated the village was, how difficult it was to get permission to stay there, and how lucky they felt to finally be allowed inside. But one of the girls barely spoke the entire trip. She wasn't rude or unfriendly, just quiet. And every now and then, I'd catch her staring at me strangely, not fear exactly, more like confusion. Like something about me didn't fully make sense to her, even from the very beginning. The further we traveled, the stranger the atmosphere became. Eventually, the roads turned into narrow, muddy paths surrounded by thick forest on both sides. There were no streetlights anymore, no nearby houses. No sound except the vehicle engine and insects somewhere deep in the trees. The students slowly became quieter too, even the joking stopped. It felt less like we were heading toward a village, and more like we were entering somewhere we weren't really supposed to go. And honestly, that feeling only became stronger the deeper we traveled into the hills. By the time we arrived, the sun was already disappearing behind the hills. The village looked beautiful at first glance. Traditional wooden houses, warm lantern lights, smoke rising from cooking fires. Everything felt calm, peaceful even. But the moment people noticed us arriving, something changed. The villagers stared silently for much longer than normal. Some looked nervous, others immediately looked away. And whenever their eyes landed on me specifically, the atmosphere somehow became even more uncomfortable without anyone saying a word. One of the older men eventually approached the group and introduced himself as the village elder. He welcomed the students politely and thanked them for respecting local traditions during their stay. Everything sounded normal until his eyes slowly shifted toward me. The moment he saw me, he suddenly stopped talking completely. Not for 1 second either, longer than that. Just staring directly at me in silence while the students awkwardly waited for him to continue. And honestly, I still remember how cold that silence felt standing there. Eventually, he continued speaking like nothing happened, but after that moment, the atmosphere never fully relaxed again. The students were assigned places to stay around the village while everyone started organizing equipment before sunset disappeared completely. But while everyone discussed sleeping arrangements, I noticed something strange. Nobody ever directly asked where I would stay. Nobody assigned me a room specifically, and somehow, despite that, I still ended up following the group naturally like I belonged there anyway. The only person who seemed bothered by that was the quiet girl. Every time the others spoke casually around me, she'd glance toward me again with that same uneasy expression. Like she wanted to say something but kept stopping herself every time. At one point, one of the students joked that I'd probably have the hardest time adjusting to village life. Everyone laughed except her. She just kept staring at me silently for several seconds before quickly looking away again. and honestly, by then even I was starting to feel uncomfortable. That night, the village changed completely. During sunset, it had felt warm and welcoming, but after dark the atmosphere became unnaturally heavy. The forest surrounding the village was completely silent, no insects, no birds, nothing. And sometime around midnight, we heard music, very faint at first. Traditional gamelan music drifting from somewhere deep inside the forest beyond the houses, slow, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. One of the students asked where it was coming from, and immediately the villagers went quiet. An older woman sitting nearby slowly looked toward the forest before quietly saying, "Don't follow the sound." That was all she said. No explanation, no warning beyond that single sentence. The students laughed nervously afterward, probably just trying to ease the tension, but nobody looked fully comfortable anymore. Especially the quiet girl, she wasn't laughing at all. She was looking directly at me again, except this time there was something different in her expression. Not confusion anymore, something closer to fear. Later that night, I couldn't sleep at all. The house felt old in a way that was difficult to explain. Every piece of wood creaked softly whenever the wind moved outside, and the deeper the night became, the heavier the atmosphere started to feel. I remember lying there staring at the ceiling while the distant sound of gamelan music drifted faintly through the forest again. Nobody else seemed awake. At least, I think they weren't. The only person I saw still outside was her, sitting quietly near one of the lanterns by herself. I walked outside and sat a short distance away from her. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. The village was so quiet that even the smallest sounds felt unnaturally loud. Eventually, I asked if she couldn't sleep either. She hesitated before quietly saying, "This place feels different at night." Her voice sounded distant somehow, like her mind was somewhere else completely. Then she suddenly looked toward the forest again, not casually either. More like she was listening carefully for something hidden deeper in the darkness. That's when I noticed the figure standing near the trees again, completely still. Human-shaped, but impossible to see clearly through the fog and darkness. I asked her if she could see it too, and the moment I said that, her expression immediately changed. Not surprise, fear, real fear. She slowly looked toward me instead of the figure and quietly asked, "You can see that?" The way she asked it made my chest feel strangely cold, because suddenly it sounded less like concern and more like confusion. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer directly. She just stared at me for several long seconds before finally whispering, "Most people here avoid looking at them, not it." That single word immediately made the atmosphere feel even worse somehow. I looked back toward the forest, but the figure was already gone. Completely disappeared without making a sound, no footsteps. No movement, nothing, just empty darkness between the trees while the gamelan music continued somewhere deeper in the hills. The next morning, I noticed something strange while everyone prepared equipment for the day. I realized I had barely spoken to anyone except her since arriving at the village. At first, that didn't seem unusual. The others were busy with cameras, interviews, project schedules. Normal student stuff, but the more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. I remembered walking beside them constantly, helping carry equipment, even sitting near them during meals. Yet somehow most of my conversations were only with her. Later that afternoon, the two of us followed one of the villagers toward a farming area near the edge of the forest. The path became narrower the further we walked, and eventually even the village sounds disappeared behind us completely. At one point, she suddenly stopped walking and asked me something that caught me completely off guard. She quietly asked, "Do you remember exactly when you arrived here?" And honestly, I couldn't answer her properly. I tried thinking back to the trip, the restaurant, the road. The vehicle ride into the hills, but the memories suddenly felt incomplete somehow. Like parts of the journey had been removed without me noticing before. I remembered laughing with the students, I remembered traveling beside them. but the details felt strangely foggy the harder I tried remembering them clearly. When I admitted that to her, she looked genuinely disturbed for the first time since we met. Before I could ask what was wrong, we suddenly heard movement deeper inside the trees nearby. Not footsteps exactly, more like something slowly dragging itself across wet ground. We both froze immediately. The forest around us had become completely silent again. Even the wind seemed gone, then somewhere deeper in the darkness, we heard faint gamelan music start playing once more. Except this time it sounded much closer than before. She grabbed my arm suddenly and told me we needed to go back immediately. Her voice sounded more frightened than I'd heard before. As we walked quickly toward the village, I noticed she kept glancing behind us every few seconds, like she expected something to appear from the forest at any moment. I asked her what was wrong, but she avoided answering directly. Eventually, she just whispered, "Some places here don't like outsiders staying too long." That night, the atmosphere inside the village became much heavier than before. Even the students who normally joked around constantly seemed quieter now. The villagers barely came outside after sunset, and most doors remained shut completely once darkness covered the village. But sometime around midnight, the music returned again, louder this time. Slow rhythmic sounds echoing through the hills, while distant shadows seemed to move between the trees. And when I looked toward her across the room, she was already staring directly at me with visible fear in her eyes. A few minutes later, one of the students suddenly realized somebody from the group was missing. At first, nobody panicked. They assumed he probably wandered outside to smoke or use the bathroom somewhere nearby. But as more time passed, the atmosphere inside the house slowly changed. People started checking outside with flashlights while the villagers watched silently from their windows without saying anything. And through all of it, the distant gamelan music from the forest never stopped playing, slow, rhythmic, almost like it was waiting for something. She immediately stood up the moment they noticed he was missing. Unlike everyone else, she didn't look confused, she looked terrified. I followed her outside while the others searched around the muddy pathways between the houses. The deeper we moved into the village, the stranger everything felt. Lantern lights flickered constantly even though there was no wind. The fog seemed thicker than before, and every now and then, I thought I saw figures standing silently near the trees, watching us pass by before disappearing again. Eventually, one of the students shouted that they found footprints leading toward the forest. The moment he said that, several villagers immediately tried stopping them from following the trail further. The village elder himself suddenly appeared and warned everyone not to enter the forest at night, but panic had already started spreading through the group. One of them insisted they couldn't just leave their friend out there alone. And honestly, at that point, I agreed with him too. Because something about the atmosphere felt deeply wrong already. The elder's expression became noticeably darker after hearing that. He looked toward the forest for several long seconds before quietly saying if he followed the sound, bringing him back may not be easy. Nobody fully understood what he meant, but the fear in his voice was obvious. The students argued with him while the villagers around us remained completely silent. And during all of it, she just stood beside me without saying anything. Her eyes never once left the forest. Eventually, a small search group was formed despite the villagers warning us repeatedly not to go. Flashlights were prepared, ropes gathered, and people started moving nervously toward the trail leading into the trees. I remember standing near the edge of the forest feeling this overwhelming sense that we were making a terrible mistake. The darkness between the trees almost looked unnatural somehow, like the forest itself was hiding something alive inside it. Before we entered the forest, she quietly pulled me aside for a moment. Her hands were shaking slightly while she looked toward the trees behind the village. Then softly she asked me something strange. She asked, "Do you ever feel like this place already knows you?" Honestly, the question caught me completely off guard. Before I could answer, someone from the search group shouted for us to move quickly before the footprints disappeared in the mud. The deeper we followed the trail into the forest, the colder the air became. The gamelan music sounded louder now, not distant anymore, close, uncomfortably close. And every step deeper somehow made the atmosphere heavier around us. The path twisted unnaturally through thick bamboo and enormous trees that blocked almost all moonlight above us. At some point I realized something strange. None of the villagers had followed us beyond the forest entrance except the elder. When I quietly pointed that out to her, she immediately looked more uneasy than before. Then softly she whispered, "Most of them are too afraid to come this far." The way she said it honestly made me want to turn back immediately. But before anyone could stop moving, one of the students suddenly pointed toward faint orange lights deeper inside the trees ahead of us. Lanterns, dozens of them glowing faintly through the fog where no village should have existed. At first, some students looked relieved. They assumed maybe another settlement existed deeper in the hills and the missing student had wandered there somehow. But the moment I looked toward her face, I realized something was terribly wrong. She looked genuinely frightened now, completely pale beneath the flashlight glow. Then quietly she whispered, "There's no village here," but the lantern lights ahead continued glowing through the fog anyway while the gamelan music slowly grew louder. Eventually we stepped into a large clearing hidden deep inside the forest. Lanterns hung from wooden poles surrounding dozens of people dressed in traditional clothing. Some moved slowly in circles, while others simply stood watching us silently. At first glance, it almost looked beautiful, peaceful even. But something about the atmosphere felt deeply wrong immediately. Nobody there looked surprised to see us. In fact, several of them slowly turned toward us at exactly the same time. That was when she quietly whispered, "Don't let them invite you." Her voice sounded genuinely terrified now. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring toward the gathering while her breathing became noticeably uneven. Meanwhile, the others were already calling out for the missing student near the edge of the clearing. And then suddenly, someone from the crowd stepped forward, smiling calmly toward us. A woman wearing traditional dancer clothing covered in gold ornaments and dark fabric. She moved strangely, not unnatural exactly. Just too smooth somehow. Every step looked almost weightless against the muddy ground. When she spoke, her voice sounded soft and welcoming. She told us the missing student was safe and resting nearby after getting lost in the forest. Some of the students immediately relaxed hearing that. One even laughed nervously and apologized for interrupting the ceremony. But honestly, something about the atmosphere still felt deeply wrong. The music surrounding the clearing sounded almost hypnotic now. Slow drums, metallic instruments, rhythmic sounds echoing through the fog between the trees. And while everyone else focused on the dancer woman speaking calmly to the group, I noticed she never once blinked while looking at us, not even once. The moment I realized that, my chest suddenly felt cold. Eventually, the missing student appeared from deeper inside the gathering. But something about him looked wrong immediately. His clothes were covered in mud, and his expression looked distant somehow, almost empty. One of the students immediately ran toward him asking where he disappeared to, but he barely responded properly. He just stared blankly toward the dancers while the music continued playing around us without stopping. The students quickly insisted on bringing him back to the village immediately. At first, the dancer woman simply smiled softly without reacting. But the moment one of them grabbed the missing student's arm, the entire atmosphere changed instantly. The music stopped completely, not slowly either, instantly, and the silence afterward felt unbearable. Nobody in the clearing moved, nobody spoke. Even the forest itself suddenly felt completely frozen around us. Then, somewhere deeper behind the lantern lights, more figures slowly started appearing from the fog between the trees, men, women, children. all dressed similarly in traditional clothing while silently staring toward us without expression. The missing student suddenly became visibly panicked after seeing them approach. He kept whispering that we needed to leave immediately before they changed their minds, honestly. Hearing him say that made the entire situation even more terrifying. One of the students nervously pulled him backward toward the forest path while everyone else slowly followed behind. Nobody wanted to stay inside the clearing anymore. Not after the way the atmosphere suddenly shifted around us. And meanwhile, the dancer woman simply watched us leave with that same calm smile on her face. Right before we reached the edge of the clearing, she quietly said something that still bothers me even now. She softly said, "Some guests stay longer than they expect." The moment those words left her mouth, the gamelan music suddenly started again somewhere behind us, except now it sounded distorted somehow. Slower, deeper, wrong, and from somewhere between the trees nearby, I suddenly heard footsteps moving through the mud beside us even though nobody else should have been there at all. That's when she suddenly grabbed my arm tightly and whispered, "Don't look behind you." The fear in her voice immediately froze my entire body. Every instinct told me something was now standing directly behind us in the darkness. I could hear wet footsteps stopping only a few feet away. Slow breathing, the faint sound of fabric dragging against mud. But nobody else in the group seemed to notice it properly. They were too busy trying to leave the clearing quickly. The moment we finally escaped the clearing and returned deeper into the forest path, the atmosphere changed again almost immediately. The gamelan music sounded farther away now, but nobody felt relieved anymore. Because by then, all of us understood one terrifying thing. Whatever existed inside that hidden place deep in the forest had allowed us to leave, and honestly, that realization frightened me far more than if something had chased us instead. Eventually, we reached the edge of the forest again, stumbling back onto the muddy village pathways, completely exhausted and terrified. Some students immediately collapsed near the houses, while others desperately checked whether everyone made it back safely. The villagers had already gathered outside, waiting silently beneath lantern light. None of them looked surprised seeing our condition. Honestly, that somehow made everything feel even worse. Especially because the distant sound of gamelan music still echoed faintly somewhere deeper in the forest. The missing student was physically back with us, but something about him felt completely different now. He barely responded whenever people spoke to him. His eyes looked distant somehow, almost unfocused. At one point, one of the students asked if he remembered what happened out there, but instead of answering, he slowly looked back toward the forest behind the village with this strangely empty expression. And honestly, seeing that terrified everyone more than they admitted. That night nobody slept. The students gathered together inside one of the houses trying desperately to explain everything we experienced. Some insisted the hidden gathering inside the forest had to be some kind of local ceremony. Others argued panic and darkness simply made everyone imagine things differently. But none of those explanations really made sense anymore. Especially not the part where the entire clearing vanished completely when we returned there. Meanwhile, she barely spoke during any of the conversations. She mostly sat quietly near the corner of the room staring down at her camera while everyone else argued nervously around us. Every now and then I noticed her glance toward me with the same uneasy expression from earlier, except now it looked mixed with something else too. Confusion, like she noticed a detail nobody else fully understood yet. At some point during the night, one of the students suddenly asked everybody to check their footage and photos from the village before leaving in the morning. The atmosphere became awkward immediately afterward. Several cameras contained corrupted files. Some videos ended abruptly for no clear reason. One student even claimed entire sections of footage from inside the forest disappeared completely despite remembering recording them clearly. Everyone blamed damaged equipment or panic from earlier. But when she quietly checked her own camera, her expression suddenly changed completely. I asked her what was wrong, but she immediately lowered the screen before anyone else could see it properly. Then quietly she shook her head and muttered something about the lighting being strange. But honestly, the tension in her voice sounded real. For the rest of the night, she barely touched the camera again. Right before sunrise, the village elder gathered everyone together outside before we prepared to leave. His expression looked exhausted, almost relieved that morning had finally arrived. He warned the students not to return to the forest again under any circumstances, especially after dark. One of the students nervously asked what exactly we saw out there the night before, but the elder stayed silent for several long seconds. Eventually, he quietly said, "Some places are not meant to remember visitors, honestly." Nobody asked another question after hearing that. The atmosphere around the village already felt disturbing enough without wanting more answers. And meanwhile, the missing student simply stood there silently staring toward the trees behind the village like part of him still hadn't fully returned with us from the forest. As everyone loaded equipment into the vehicles, I noticed something strange again. Conversations around me felt oddly disconnected somehow. Not hostile, not intentional either. But every now and then, students would accidentally speak over me or continue conversations like they forgot I was standing nearby for a second. At first, I assumed everyone was simply exhausted after the forest incident. But the more I noticed it happening, the more uncomfortable the feeling became. And every time it happened, she would quietly glance toward me again with growing unease before quickly looking away. Honestly, by then I was starting to feel like something about the entire village experience still didn't fully make sense yet. And somehow, I had the horrible feeling the real nightmare wasn't over at all. We stopped at a roadside restaurant several hours later so everyone could finally rest. The atmosphere was still tense, but at least being away from the village made things feel slightly more normal again. Some students quietly discussed canceling the entire project completely after what happened. Others insisted they couldn't leave yet without understanding why the missing student still looked so disturbed. Meanwhile, he barely touched his food at all. He just sat silently staring toward the nearby trees beyond the parking area like something out there was still calling him. That was when one of the female students suddenly disappeared too. At first, nobody panicked because they assumed she simply went to the bathroom or stepped outside for air. But after nearly 20 minutes passed without seeing her anywhere, the tension immediately returned. Several students started searching nearby while calling her name repeatedly, and honestly, the expression on the missing boy's face during all of it terrified me more than anything, because instead of looking worried, he looked guilty. Like he already knew exactly where she went. Eventually, she was found standing alone near the edge of the forest behind the restaurant. Completely motionless, one of the students approached her first and immediately asked what she was doing out there, but she barely reacted. Her eyes looked unfocused somehow, almost trance-like beneath the dim roadside lights, and then slowly, she started moving her hands strangely. Soft, graceful movements almost resembling traditional dance motions. The moment she began doing that, Rati suddenly looked genuinely frightened beside me, because somehow, the movements looked exactly like the dancers inside the forest clearing, even worse. The missing boy immediately lowered his head the moment he saw her movements begin. After bringing her back inside, the missing boy finally broke down completely. He admitted that while everyone slept during the second night inside the village, he secretly snuck into the Forbidden's area together with the missing girl. At first, they only wanted privacy away from the others, somewhere hidden, somewhere quiet. But eventually, they wandered deeper than they were supposed to go. Beyond the sacred boundary, the villagers specifically warned everyone never to cross. According to him, the place looked abandoned at first. Just old stone structures covered in moss surrounded by enormous trees and offerings left beneath lanterns. But despite the warnings, they stayed there anyway, and eventually, they committed one of the deepest taboos possible inside that sacred place. The moment he admitted that, the entire restaurant became completely silent. Even the villagers helping nearby refused to look directly at him anymore. He said the atmosphere changed immediately afterward. The forest became unnaturally cold. The lanterns surrounding the sacred place suddenly went out one by one. And somewhere deeper in the darkness, gamelan music slowly started echoing through the trees again. At first they tried leaving immediately, but according to him, the paths no longer looked the same anymore. The deeper they walked, the more lost they became, and eventually, they realized something else was moving through the forest beside them. He described seeing long, dark shapes sliding silently between the trees nearby. Not fully visible, just movement, wet dragging sounds against mud. And every time they stopped walking, the sounds stopped too. Meanwhile, the girl beside him slowly became quieter and quieter until eventually she started humming softly to herself while staring blankly toward the darkness. The moment he said that, she suddenly began moving her hands again inside the restaurant. Slow, graceful gestures like an invisible rhythm was still controlling her body somehow. The students immediately tried stopping her, but she barely reacted at all. Her expression remained completely distant while the dance movements continued. Then suddenly she whispered something so quietly we almost missed it. She softly said, "The guardian is angry." The moment those words left her mouth, the missing boy immediately started crying again. Reti finally explained what the villagers were truly afraid of. According to local beliefs, the sacred place deep inside the forest belonged to an ancient guardian spirit connected to the village itself. And what the missing boy and girl did there was considered one of the worst violations possible. Not just disrespect, desecration, and honestly. Hearing the fear in Reti's voice while explaining that made the entire situation feel horrifyingly real. Later that night, the missing boy suddenly disappeared again. This time everyone panicked immediately. Students rushed outside searching nearby while the sound of distant gamelan music echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the hills once more. And almost instinctively, everyone already knew where he had gone. The sacred place inside the forest, the atmosphere became chaotic fast as several villagers from nearby areas were contacted for help. But Reti looked pale the entire time because according to her, if the guardian had already chosen them, bringing them back might no longer be possible. Honestly, hearing her say that made the entire situation feel hopeless immediately. Still, nobody was willing to leave them inside the forest alone. Especially not after seeing the girl's strange condition becoming worse by the hour. So, before sunrise, a search group entered the forest again. This time, several older villagers guided the way while carrying lanterns instead of flashlights. According to them, artificial light sometimes confused the paths deeper inside the hills at night. Nobody fully understood what that meant anymore. But after everything we already witnessed inside the village, nobody argued either. The deeper we walked into the forest, the heavier the atmosphere became. And somewhere far away beyond the fog, the gamelan music continued echoing faintly again. After nearly an hour of walking, one of the villagers suddenly stopped near a narrow stone pathway almost completely hidden beneath roots and moss. The moment he saw it, his entire expression changed immediately. He quietly warned everyone not to speak loudly anymore while leading us deeper through the trees. And eventually, we started seeing offerings scattered along the ground nearby, flowers, burned incense. Pieces of cloth tied around ancient trees. The deeper we followed the path, the stronger the smell of incense became until it almost felt suffocating. Then finally, we reached the sacred place again. Even during daylight, the area felt deeply wrong somehow. Old stone structures stood silently between enormous trees, while dozens of lanterns hung motionless despite the wind moving through the forest around us. The atmosphere there felt unnaturally cold. At first, we couldn't find either of them anywhere. The villagers searched around the stone ruins carefully while whispering prayers under their breath. And honestly, part of me hoped we wouldn't find them at all, because something about the atmosphere there felt deeply unnatural, like the entire place itself was alive somehow. Then suddenly one of the villagers shouted from deeper near the trees. Everyone rushed toward the sound immediately. The missing girl was sitting motionless beneath one of the enormous trees near the edge of the sacred area. Her body was still upright, perfectly balanced, almost unnaturally straight, while her hands rested softly against her knees. Her eyes were open but completely unfocused. And the worst part was that her feet were still moving slowly against the ground. Tiny rhythmic motions, like part of her body was continuing a dance nobody else could hear. One of the students immediately broke down crying after seeing her like that. Then someone noticed the missing boy nearby. At first, I genuinely thought he was dead. He was kneeling beside one of the old stone structures with his head lowered completely while his arms wrapped tightly around something moving beneath him. And when villagers carefully approached closer, we finally saw it clearly. A long dark serpent-like shape slowly coiled around his body while making soft, wet sounds against the mud. Not fully animal, not fully human either. Something in between, and somehow, the boy looked completely calm holding it. One of the villagers immediately pulled everyone backward after seeing that. The fear in his face looked completely real. He quietly explained that the guardian had already accepted the punishment. According to him, the sacred place demanded balance whenever one of its deepest taboos was broken. The girl would remain bound to the sacred place itself, becoming part of the eternal dance serving the guardian, and the boy would spend the rest of his existence caring for what the villagers described only as the guardian's child. Honestly, nobody there fully understood whether those words were symbolic or literal anymore. Nobody fully understood whether the villagers meant those words literally or symbolically. Honestly, I'm still not sure even now because the thing wrapped around the boy's body didn't look entirely real. Its shape kept shifting strangely beneath the fog and lantern light like our eyes couldn't fully process what we were seeing clearly. But one detail terrified everyone immediately. The missing boy was still breathing, slowly, calmly, completely alive. Yet at the same time, his expression looked empty in a way no normal human face should ever look. Meanwhile, the girl suddenly began moving again beneath the tree. Slowly at first, her arms lifted gracefully into the air. Then her body started performing the exact same dance movements we saw inside the forest clearing earlier. Except now there was no music around us at all, no drums. No gamelan, nothing, yet her body continued moving perfectly in rhythm with something invisible. Several students immediately tried approaching her, but the villagers physically stopped them from getting closer. One older man quietly explained that interrupting the ritual now could make things even worse for everyone present. The students screamed at him angrily after hearing that, demanding they help their friends instead of standing there doing nothing. But honestly, even the villagers looked terrified. None of them wanted to stay near the sacred place any longer than necessary. Then suddenly the distant sound of gamelan music echoed through the trees again. Except this time, it wasn't distant anymore. The music sounded close, extremely close, almost surrounding the sacred place itself. And slowly, figures began appearing between the trees nearby once again. Dancers, villagers, silent lantern-bearing silhouettes emerging from the fog exactly like before. The moment the students saw them approaching, panic spread immediately. But unlike earlier, none of the figures looked toward us this time. Their attention remained focused entirely on the girl beneath the tree. The dancers slowly formed a circle around the sacred place while the gamelan music continued rising louder. Meanwhile, the girl kept dancing in perfect rhythm without ever once looking up at anyone around her. One of the villagers quietly whispered that the guardian had accepted her completely now. And honestly, hearing those words made my chest feel cold instantly. Because the way he said accepted didn't sound symbolic at all. It sounded permanent. Like whatever happened there had already gone far beyond anything normal people could and do anymore. Then one of the dancers slowly stepped forward from the fog toward the students nearby. The moment I saw her face clearly beneath the lantern light, my stomach immediately dropped. It was the same dancer woman from the hidden forest gathering. She calmly looked across the terrified students before softly saying something none of us will probably ever forget. She said, "One day, another will take her place." The way she smiled afterward honestly terrified me more than anything else inside the forest. The villagers immediately forced everyone to leave the sacred place after that. Some students resisted desperately, still trying to save their friends somehow, but eventually panic and exhaustion overwhelmed everyone completely. And honestly, deep down, I think everybody already understood the horrifying truth. The 2 students we found near the sacred place were technically still alive, breathing, moving, existing. But whatever returned from the forest that morning no longer fully belonged to the normal world anymore. Even after leaving the village behind, the atmosphere around everyone remained completely broken. The boy never fully regained awareness after that night. According to the students, his condition became worse almost immediately after returning home. He barely spoke, barely moved. And every night, he kept muttering things about music and dancing somewhere deep inside the forest while sleeping. His family eventually brought him to a hospital in the city hoping medical treatment could somehow help him recover. But exactly 3 weeks after leaving the village, he suddenly passed away without doctors ever fully understanding what caused his condition to deteriorate so quickly. The girl's condition was somehow even more disturbing. Unlike the boy, she survived physically for years afterward. But according to everyone close to her, she never truly woke up again after the forest incident. She remained trapped in a coma-like state while still keeping her eyes partially open almost all the time. Even 5 years later, her condition never changed. She remained alive, breathing, eyes partially open, completely unresponsive to the world around her. Doctors couldn't explain it properly. Her heartbeat remained stable. Her body was technically healthy. Yet her awareness never returned, and the longer the years passed, the stranger her condition slowly became inside the hospital. Her body gradually became more stiff over time, not sickly stiff either, more like severe muscle exhaustion that never recovered. Nurses described her arms and legs becoming increasingly tense and rigid despite barely moving for years. One doctor reportedly compared the condition to someone forcing their body through extreme physical activity continuously without rest. And honestly, hearing that explanation immediately reminded everyone of the endless dance inside the forest. Some nurses working night shifts near her room even claimed they occasionally heard faint rhythmic tapping sounds coming from inside despite nobody touching anything. Others refused entering the room alone after midnight, because according to them, her fingers sometimes moved slowly against the bed sheets like she was following invisible music nobody else could hear. And honestly, even hearing those stories secondhand made my chest feel cold. Over time, most of the students stopped talking about the village completely. Some transferred universities, others refused discussing the incident ever again. It was like everyone wanted to erase the entire experience from memory, except for one person, Rati. She was apparently the only one who still visited the girl regularly at the hospital even years later, despite how disturbing the situation remained. According to Rati, every time she entered the hospital room, the atmosphere around the girl still felt exactly the same as the sacred place deep inside the forest. Heavy, cold, wrong somehow. And sometimes, Rati claimed she could still faintly hear gamelan music late at night near the room despite nobody else around noticing anything unusual at all. 5 years after the incident, Rati contacted me again unexpectedly. She said she wanted to return to the village one last time and ask the elder directly what truly happened that night inside the forest. At first, I hesitated immediately after hearing that. Even hearing the village mentioned again made my chest feel heavy, but eventually, curiosity overcame fear. Because despite everything that happened there, none of us ever truly understood the full truth. The village looked almost unchanged when we finally returned years later. The same muddy roads, the same dense forest surrounding the hills, the same unsettling silence after sunset. Yet somehow, the atmosphere felt calmer this time. Older, tired almost. The villagers recognized Rati immediately when we arrived, and honestly, the expressions on their faces carried genuine relief seeing her return safely. That night, the elder finally explained something the villagers rarely spoke about openly. According to him, the sacred place deep inside the forest demanded balance whenever one of its deepest taboos was broken intentionally. And because the boy and girl willingly violated the most forbidden boundary there, the guardian accepted them both as part of the sacred place itself. Rati eventually asked the question neither of us truly wanted answered. She quietly asked whether the girl trapped in the hospital would ever wake up again. The elder stayed silent for several seconds before slowly shaking his head. Then calmly he explained that although her body remained among the living world, part of her spirit continued dancing within the sacred place even now. According to him, every sacred dancer eventually waits for another soul to someday take her place in the future. Honestly, hearing that answer terrified me more than I expected, because the elder described it so calmly, like the forest had repeated the same cycle many times long before any of us ever arrived there. And honestly, that thought still disturbs me even now. Before leaving the village the next morning, Rati and I quietly walked together near the edge of the forest one final time. The fog drifting between the trees looked almost beautiful beneath the morning light now. Peaceful even, but honestly, after everything we learned there, I knew I would never truly look at places like that the same way again. Rati eventually laughed softly and admitted that despite how terrifying the experience was, part of her still wanted to keep exploring strange places like this someday. I remember asking her why after everything that happened. She thought carefully for a moment before answering quietly because some places hide terrible things, but they also hide truths people normally never get to see. Honestly, hearing that somehow stayed with me long after we left the village behind. Because despite the fear, despite the trauma, despite everything we witnessed there, part of me understood exactly what she meant. Some mysteries are horrifying, but once you've seen them, normal life never really feels the same again afterward. Eventually, we reached the road where our transportation waited to take us back toward the city again. Before getting inside the vehicle, Rati suddenly stopped and looked toward me quietly for several seconds. Then she smiled slightly for the very first time since I met her years earlier and jokingly said, "Next time we explore somewhere cursed, let's try not breaking any sacred taboos." Honestly, after everything we survived, hearing her joke like that somehow made the atmosphere finally feel human again. For the first time in years, the fear felt slightly lighter somehow. And as we finally drove away from the village together, I remember realizing something strange. Despite everything that happened there, this probably wouldn't be the last unexplained place we'd ever explore together. And even now, years later, I still think about that village sometimes late at night when everything becomes quiet enough. The dancers, the music, the fog between the trees, and especially the terrifying realization that somewhere deep inside those hills, the sacred dance is probably still continuing even now beneath lantern light without rest, waiting silently for the day another outsider eventually wanders too far into the forest, and unknowingly takes the next dancer's place. And honestly, after everything I saw there myself, I truly believe that day will come eventually. And honestly, after that experience, there are moments where I still catch myself listening to carefully whenever I hear traditional music late at night somewhere far away. Because part of me always remembers the forest, the fog, the lanterns, the endless sound of dancing somewhere beyond the trees, and sometimes I still wonder how many people disappeared into places like that long before anyone ever told stories about them. Maybe some villages truly hide things that aren't meant to be disturbed. Maybe certain boundaries exist for reasons outsiders simply don't understand until it's already too late. And honestly, after everything I witnessed there myself, I don't think every local legend is just superstition anymore. Some places feel old in a way that goes far beyond history. Places where something unseen still quietly watches from the darkness, waiting patiently for the next person curious enough to wander too far from the path. And if you ever hear music deep inside a forest at night, honestly, don't follow it. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exploration into the unknown here on Nusantara Nocturne. And tell me in the comments, would you ever enter a place like that? Knowing you might never truly come back the same. Until next time, stay safe. And don't follow the music in the forest. And thanks for watching.